All right, everybody, I want to thank everybody first, especially the stock growers and grain growers, of course, of Montana, and then the Association of Gallatin Agricultural Irrigators and Montana Farm Bureau for hosting this. I'm Senator Walt Sales from Senate District 35. I'd like to, again, thank everybody and again, the attendees and the stakeholders. I believe we have about 7 different stakeholders from a wide array of interest groups on this initiative that wanted to at least have the opportunity, right, to share some of the effects that they see if this passes and makes a ballot initiative, that it will affect or how it will affect their livelihoods. So with that, it's a fairly short time frame. We are going to try to hold it to the time frame of, I believe it was 7:30, and at the end we've got about a 20-minute segment of question and answers inside the chat. I believe most folks are well versed with being able to put in the questions, and we'll try to monitor that and present those questions and find the best fitted person to respond to that. Introductions, I'm just going to quickly introduce, and it won't be anything at great length because they basically are held to 10 minutes to present themselves and their interest in this. So it'll be a fairly fast paced, I believe, webinar tonight, but the focus again will be trying to share that information. And then at the end also, we'll be able to, if you want to get more involved or how to do that, we'll be able to provide you that information as well. So with that being said, I believe that should at least get us started. If we're going to start with Krista Lee Evans with Aggie, the Association of Gallatin Irrigators, and she can go ahead and start with the review of the language of the Initiative 191. So, Krista.
Thank you, Senator Sales. Again, I'm Krista Lee Evans with the Association of Gallatin Agricultural Irrigators. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the actual language in the initiative. We'll just go over it briefly. For those of you that want to read all of the language, it is available on the Montana Secretary of State website, and that is sos.mt.gov. And there's 3 things that I-191 does. One is it delineates a section of the Gallatin River from the boundary of Yellowstone Park to the confluence of Spanish Creek, and that's in the Gallatin. And then in the Madison, it says from Hebgen Lake to Ennis Lake. And then thirdly, a very significant piece that is often overlooked in conversations about the initiative I-191 is the fact that existing law as it relates to outstanding resource waters, which currently impacts the state's ability to permit a permanent change in water quality. The initiative changes that language and includes the word any temporary change in water quality. So really those are the 3 things. It lists the 2 stretches, one in the Gallatin, one in the Madison, and then also adds the word temporary into existing law in how and where permits can be issued. So that's a quick and dirty on what the initiative does. But if you want all the language, you can go to Secretary of State website. Thanks.
Okay, sorry, folks. So thank you, Krista. Moving now into with DEQ, and just quickly, Amy, they've allowed, I guess, well, I shouldn't say they allowed, but you did, and I also want to sort of fit in, right, at the WIPIC, the interim committee. We did hear a lot of this testimony, so this just fits well with the testimony I believe that you gave there. So Amy, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Amy Steinmetz, and I am the Water Quality Division Administrator at the Department of Environmental Quality. And I am just going to talk a little bit tonight about a process that we already have outlined in Montana statute on how to designate a water body as an outstanding resource water. There is currently a very complex multi-step process to designate a water body as an outstanding resource water. So I'll go through those steps and then talk just a little bit at the very end about why it is that we have so many steps and why it is such a complicated process. So first of all, the very first step that has to be taken in order to designate a water body as an outstanding resource water is that a party can petition the Department of Environmental Quality for rulemaking to classify a state water as an ORW. And before accepting the petition, DEQ has to publish a notice and a brief description of the petition in a newspaper that is in the area, local area near the water body. We need to provide for a 30-day public comment period. We have to hold a public hearing, and you'll hear me say throughout this process, there are actually 3 different public steps for the public to be involved in this process. So there are many opportunities for public involvement. And so with this petition, there are actually 2 steps, and I'm going to mention both of the steps now because it could get a little bit confusing, but there's an accept or reject the petition. And then the second part of that is that DEQ can grant or deny the petition. So I'll be talking about both of those a little bit. So the petition may be rejected if it doesn't contain the necessary information to make the determination that I'm going to be talking about next, and that is DEQ's review of the petition against the following criteria. And these are just justification that would indicate that it's appropriate for a water body to be considered an outstanding resource water. These are considerations like the water is wild and scenic. There are endangered or threatened species in the water. There's an outstanding recreational fishery in the water. The water is the only source for a municipality or industry. The water is the only suitable source for domestic water supply. And then there are other factors. So after doing a comprehensive review, then DEQ must issue written finding, accepting or rejecting the petition, has to identify the justification, and then explain why other processes that we already have available in the Clean Water Act or Water Quality Act, tools like non-degradation and permitting, why those aren't sufficient to protect the water for those uses, those justifications. So then there's more public participation. After we do that written finding, DEQ must provide for a 30-day public comment period regarding the written decision. And then finally, DEQ issues a final decision on the acceptance or rejection of the petition, and that has to include a response to all comments received. The next step then, after DEQ accepts a petition, then an environmental impact statement must be prepared. DEQ, after preparing the environmental impact statement, then consults with other state agencies and local governments. So then there's an opportunity to bring in other agencies like Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, Department of Agriculture, any of the other state agencies, we would bring them into the process next. And then after those steps are complete, DEQ can grant or deny the petition. Now, a couple of grounds of denial for an outstanding resource outlined in statute are insufficient justification for the designation, as we talked about a little bit. And then another grounds for denial would be that the ORW designation would cause significant adverse environmental, social, or economic impacts. And those would typically be determined through that environmental impact statement, but they could be determined by other factors as well. Now, if DEQ does grant the petition, we would then initiate rulemaking to classify the water as an ORW. And with official rulemaking, there's another public participation piece. Once the rule is then adopted, it wouldn't be effective until the legislature approves it. So as I mentioned, there are multiple steps to this process. And the reason that it's so detailed is because this designation does give water bodies that additional level of protection. A couple of things that DEQ cannot do if a water body is designated as an outstanding resource water. And again, these are in the same statute. We can't grant an authorization to degrade in an outstanding resource water. And then another a big deal for these waters is that we can't allow a new or increased point source discharge that would result in a permanent change in water quality. Now, as Krista Lee mentioned, one of the big changes that this this initiative includes is that not only could we not issue a permit for a permanent change in water quality, but we couldn't issue permits for temporary changes in these water bodies. Currently, just as an FYI, all state waters located completely within the boundaries of designated national parks or wilderness areas are outstanding resource waters, but we do have this process available if there are other water bodies that should be designated as outstanding resource waters. So a couple of things, well, actually, I'll let the other speakers get to that because I know they will. I will go ahead and end it there. And then of course, they'll be available for questions toward the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amy. And we'll just move then right into the impacts of agriculture. We've got Bob Sitz. If Bob, you're able.
Okay, I'm Bob Sitz. I've lived in the Madison Valley my entire life. We ranch in this area and know this area well. I'm on the Conservation District Board also, along with Stockgrowers, and I've been on the County Planning Board. I guess a couple things. First off, Environmental Law Center. We have dealt with these people for years in grazing, and most of the multiple use people have. They have not been friendly to any of the multiple use people. I would just say that 191 goes way too far and does not or support agriculture ever. One of the things in our area, was the Heli sheep grazing permit, which the Fish and Game, Forest Service, and the Helis all agreed on introduction of wild bighorn sheep. They didn't like that and appealed and went after the Helis on that. In this area, we have the Conservation District. It was created a long time ago just for a lot of this stuff so that we have local control. And the Conservation District basically monitors what's going on. You have to apply for a 310 permit for a lot of these issues already. This would basically eliminate our board, basically, because we would not be able to do any of the things that we do now. And also in the Madison Valley, there has been tremendous amount of conservation work. A lot of this conservation work would not be done because there is some mitigation of, when you do stream bank enhancement and things, fisheries and things like that. We've done a lot of work on TMDLs in this area along with the state. And so we know kind of what's going on and have worked to correct it and make things better. And I would just say this, head gates, bridges, anything along the river would be very, very costly or difficult to get done if this goes through. Along with fishing access sites, anything that you build or activities along this area, head gates, diversions, or whatever. Really, this bill is designed to eliminate growth. And I understand that. I've lived here my entire life, and I'm not saying I'm for all the growth that we see here. But on top of that, it's going to eliminate economic activity. It's going to be a takings against property owners along those rivers. And it's going to hurt our economy and hamstring, county governments, facilities that are going to be needed in the future for Big Sky. And also for ranchers and that, because, activities from grazing to whatever activity along those rivers that may not impair, but cause some change in TMDLs would be affected. And I just think that it's gone. If this is just way, way too much for where this is, there's better ways to do this than this, in my opinion. And I guess the big thing that I see is this is going to be a boondoggle in some ways for, the Cottonwood Legal Fund down the road, because that's what they do. Their activity is to sue. And, them and other groups have taken $1 billion out of the federal government over the years, just for these, things and technicalities. And along with that, I would just say that this group has already filed to get FOIA requests on all the forest permits and the gravelies, which I'm one of the permittees in this area. So I just have a hard time with this group proposing this. I think they're doing it for the wrong reasons, and I think there's better ways.
All right, thank you, Bob. Yep, thank you. Yep, that came in good. And just for the attendees, we've got the chat open. If some of those speakers, as they go, if you come up with a question that you want to enter during the question and answer, feel free to type it in either in the question and answer or the chat, and we'll be monitoring that as well. So, all right. Moving now into, we have David Smith from the Contractors on the impacts of road maintenance and improvements that we're seeing in that 112-mile area. And maybe David too, or Amy, but I want to stress, right, that it's not just the corridor of what we may be used to, right, on Highway 191 or the Madison side. We're talking the tributaries and, you know, up on any of these roads. So maybe David, if you want to touch on that.
Yes, thank you, Senator, and thanks for everybody putting this on. I think the more information we have about any kind of legislative or ballot related measure, the better. Real quick, a little bit about the Montana Contractors Association. There are over 34,000 people employed in the state of Montana at an average wage of more than 35% more than the average Montana wage. So this is a pretty strong industry in Montana, and it's a pretty important industry to keep striving for or thriving. The MCA is the leading voice for commercial and highway construction in the state of Montana. And I guess I would start by saying, first of all, that I think that contractors are among the most pro-environmental group that there could be out there. And the reason why I say that is because any project that has to occur, be it a highway, a building, anything other than that, the permitting that is required for a contractor to go through is quite extensive. And the project cannot start unless every level of government has signed off that it meets all of the standards. So with that said, we believe that this initiative could have a really chilling effect on temporary road work and development. Right now, MDT is in the process of a very deep study on improving the safety of Highway 191 through Gallatin Canyon. And those improvements will absolutely require construction and maintenance projects. So let's take, for example, chip sealing. Chip sealing is a process that's used to extend the life of roadways, but even of a greater importance, chip sealing provides a grip on the road for tires. So as you're driving, even in dry conditions, tires can slide. Imagine in the Gallatin Canyon where you have ice and snow and shade most of the seasons, most of the year. So as I read this initiative, even a safety project of chip sealing, which is putting down a layer of tar and crushed gravel on top of that. Even chip sealing is not possible with this. So I think you could imagine an SUV upside down in the river because it would slide off the road. So other points would be bridge abutments. There's a lot of guardrail and bridge work that has to be done as maintenance and repair projects through both of these areas. And so what happens to all of those projects? Emergency, you have to get out there, you have to fix the road, you have to fix the bridge abutment immediately. Again, another big question that we don't really know the answer to, but as we read this, we say, this does not look good. So speaking of gripping the road, MDT and county maintenance groups, they have to put a lot of sand on the roads to keep cars from sliding off in the ice and snow. That sand and gravel mix eventually finds its way to the side of the road. And eventually some of it does find its way into waterways, which I don't believe is going to be allowed under this measure. So does that mean we can't put sand and gravel on the roads anymore in the wintertime? The next aspect I want to address is during any kind of construction project, if you drive along a road anywhere in the United States, you'll see bales of hay, or you'll see black tarp lined up along the side of areas where there's a water intercourse. So during construction, there is a stormwater pollution prevention permit that's issued for a temporary period. And contractors are trained and certified by professional engineers to design any kind of inhibitor from the debris migrating into a waterway. So this is a scientific checks and balances program that is strictly adhered to during the course of construction. So DEQ, MDT, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps of Engineers all observe and regulate this process quite thoroughly. As a result, the motoring public, landowners and developers and species are all protected and carefully monitored now. So I guess in the end, I would just say that I feel like this raises hundreds of questions and concerns, but I'm not sure that they can be answered. So I really advise people strongly to not sign a petition if it's presented to them, and oppose this measure as it is, if it advances any further. So that's a short synopsis of the construction perspective on this, Senator Sales.
Okay, yep, thank you, David, for that aspect of the effects of the initiative. Now, there's been a change in the agenda just a bit, but talking on the conservation side, we do have Carl Christians from the Conservation District of Lewis and Clark that will touch a little bit, and maybe on what we heard from Bob. But being a conservation supervisor, some of what you see the effects and limits on what you do and have done, and maybe even some of those projects that you're looking at ahead. So, Carl?
You bet. Thank you, Senator Sales and David. Again, my name's Carl Christians, and I live just outside of Helena, out in the Helena Valley. I'm a farmer, rancher, irrigator, but I am also a conservation district supervisor who previously worked for DNRC for 30 years in the world of water, 15 in the floodplain management world, and 15 years in working with conservation districts. And Bob mentioned and brought up what conservation districts do a little bit, but I'm going to reiterate a few more things. On the stream permitting side, conservation districts were tasked legislatively to administer the Natural Streambed Land Preservation Act. That was in 1975. And the reason conservation districts were tasked with this permitting responsibility is conservation districts are made up of elected supervisors. They're nonpartisan. They are also not paid to do that job. They volunteer their time. So that should tell you that they have a serious desire to protect that resource and the natural resources and streams. And so legislature noticed that and tasked the conservation districts to do that. So this stream permitting, we call it, it's the Streambed Land Preservation Act. In short, it was Senate Bill 310. So we just call it the 310 permit process. And across the state, we have 58 conservation districts, and they issue well over 1,000 permits. Now, I retired from DNRC, but I'm going to guess they're probably up around 12 to 1,500 310 permits across the state. And then I know Gallatin Conservation District, Madison Conservation District, they issue a large number of permits just because of the rivers and streams that they have in their district. And another key point is there's a lot of agencies that request conservation districts help on things. TMDLs, Bob mentioned the TMDLs that they do. They've worked on those for a number of years. And so really in a nutshell, the 310 permit is administered by local landowners for local landowners. They have a great relationship, and the type of permits that would be affected or that they issue and work with are maintenance. We see a lot of stream bank stabilization projects. You know, we might have a tree fall during a flood event. root wad pull out, and then you start to get that little scour and eddy. And sometimes we can just allow a landowner to go in and do a small mitigation project. And if this initiative were to pass, they'd be stopped to do that. So that could start the unraveling of that river system. Even though Mother Nature tipped that tree over, we're at a time where everything has to be managed. There's maintenance on everything. And free and wild would end up in a disaster. And there's other, Bob mentioned irrigation diversions. That if there's diversions in this area, that would be stopped. The way we read it, you would not be able to go in and manage that diversion, do any maintenance work on it, or relocate it, or anything. And so that would be a huge hit to agriculture. And I'm looking at my notes here. Another concern that we have seen, and it's getting less and less, but if this initiative were to pass, we would see a lot of work done in the middle of the night, and probably in a way that could have a negative impact. By having this 310 permit system in and other permits, landowners work with these conservation district supervisors, ourselves, and we can offer advice because of our experience and knowledge, and get a project done and done right. So the impact is minimal. When we review a permit, we have 7 effects that we look at. We looked at the effect of soil erosion and sedimentation. We look at the risk of flooding and erosion problems upstream or downstream. We look at the effects of stream flow, turbidity, or water quality caused by materials used or removed. Okay. We look at the effects on the fish and aquatic habitat. And are there reasonable alternatives to reduce the disturbance to stream or better accomplish the purpose of the project? So really, conservation districts with the 310 permitting process, they really look at everything, and because they're basically legislated to keep that stream in as natural state as possible. So we would hate to see this initiative pass, because that would take that away. Then we'd see a lot of things go in. People are going to have to conduct maintenance. They're going to have to do things on that stream bank, on their stream bank, to protect themselves. They got to protect it from erosion. Land loss, it can add up pretty quickly. And so yeah, from conservation district supervisor hat that I wear tonight, this initiative just could be the start of the end for agriculture. It would take away conservation district's ability to work with landowners and get good projects on the ground that are needed. So really, that's kind of my perspective on this initiative. So with that, I will turn it over to, where am I at?
Yep, okay, well, yeah, we have Kerry White. Yep, thanks, Carl. And it truly sounds like, right, that there could be an adverse effect of the work that you've done with landowners and stakeholders, trying to protect that health of that river and that water course, to where it sounds like it could be detrimental, and not being able to continue that work and just let the river run. It definitely sounds there could be a complete opposite effect of what the intention may be from these folks. But
Absolutely.
Right. So I appreciate that outlook. And now we'll move into Kerry White with in this hat, right, who wears many, but Citizens for Balanced Use. So Kerry, the impacts of access. How do you see this maybe affecting that and the folks that get out and enjoy?
Thanks, Senator Sales. Appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity tonight. Citizens for Balanced Use, I'm going to talk a little bit about access, multiple use access, motorized and mechanized use. Survey that was done by Fish, Wildlife and Parks, 2021, actually go back to 2012, 2013, snowmobile use just in Buck Creek, one drainage in the Gallatin was 11,677 trail counts in 2012, 2013. If you move that forward to 2020, 2021, 7 years later, that same trail count in Buck Creek went to 23,396. If you look at, on average, a snowmobile would spend about $300 a day. Maybe you bought the snowmobile, maybe you rented it, maybe you bought food, maybe you bought fuel, maybe you bought parts, maybe you drove your truck and trailer up there, about $300 a day. So just that one drainage up in the Gallatin would direct spending about $7 million. And that's just for the winter use season. And you could translate that over to the summer use season, and it would be about the same, if not more. So just that one drainage in the Gallatin, you're talking direct spending to the economy of about $14 million. You have other drainages up there that are very active for trail use. You got the Taylor's Fork, Carrot Basin area. You've got the Buffalo Horn area. You got the Porcupine area. These are used by the motorized and mechanized users up there. You got Portal Creek, you got Moose Creek, you got Swan Creek. You've got Stormcastle Creek. All of those directly come off as tributaries of the West Gallatin River, and that would be above the Spanish Creek, the confluence at Spanish Creek. So that's a huge economic driver, I guess is what I'm getting at, in recreation that goes up there. Now, with the impact of recreation on these roads and trails, both motorized and mechanized use, and there's a lot of equestrian use up there and horses. There's a lot of hikers up there. There's a lot of recreation activities go along. All that use, you got to have your trail maintenance up there. I would say over in the Gallatin, I'm involved with the Gallatin Valley Snowmobile Association. They maintain 142 miles of trail in the Gallatin for the grooming that goes on up there. And that also benefits the summer users as well in that area. You can bring that over to the Madison. It translates to the same amount of spending and use over there. The West Fork of the Madison, Wall Creek, all of those different areas up there are used heavily for recreation, and all of those trails need maintained. Now, when we go and maintain those trails on the Forest Service and on state, we have to go through the National Environmental Policy Act, and you also have to comply with the Montana Environmental Policy Act. Those projects that you do, any kind of ground disturbance, you have to go through and make sure that those are properly done, that you try to minimize any kind of sedimentation that might go into these tributaries. If you go up Stormcastle, that road for the first mile and a half goes right adjacent to the West Gallatin River. So with those maintenance projects, we do weed projects and weed spraying. We install water bars. A lot of times culverts get plugged up. The culvert needs to be cleaned out, or a culvert might need to be replaced, or a bridge might need to be replaced. Any and all of these activities where that language in that initiative on the ORW states that no temporary permit can be issued for sedimentation or any kind of discharge into that river, cannot be a permit cannot be granted, even in a temporary state, if you were to go in and replace a culvert. And the consequences of not doing this maintenance is additional sedimentation and TMDLs, which is total maximum daily loads, which is what DEQ, DNRC deal with all the time, and along with MEPA and NEPA, to reduce those TMDLs and discharge into these streams. They have a very rigorous compliance that you have to comply with, I should say, regulations you have to comply with. in order to do these projects. But if we don't do the projects, we're not going to have safe roads and trails. We're going to lose these through erosion. All of these need maintained as people use them, and they will disappear. And along with that, you're going to lose $14 million a year, basically just in the Gallatin, and probably that much over in the Madison. I think Mr. Sitz talked about the economic impact of this. It's going to have a huge economic impact with the visitation that's coming through Yellowstone Park and stopping and spending their money in these gateway communities. The Madison and the Gallatin are the gateway communities to Yellowstone Park. And we need to maintain all of these facilities. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I appreciate the opportunity, Senator Sales, for explaining what the impact will be, and it will be if this is designated an ORW. We are going to lose a lot of recreation facilities and opportunities in both the Gallatin and the Madison. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Kerry. And right, as Representative White, I'm hoping right in some of these question times that maybe some of the folks, the attendees, would be able to ask you your feelings on, right, the process that we've done in the past and the collaborative work that's been done, and maybe the rigors of, right, what's in place and why those are in place. I know you've been deeply involved in that. So maybe some of your viewpoints, if those questions come, I'll lean a little bit on you on that. But I do think too that, Kerry, you brought up a good point on the tributaries, right? And I'm seeing a few of the questions that we'll share as we get to that. But this is going to affect those tributaries very, very well, equally, right? Not just the main stems, but those smaller tributaries that definitely will affect those landowners. So if we could, we'll shift now to Chuck Deneau. Chuck, I know you're going to talk a little bit about the campaign and getting involved, but maybe, and I know you're pretty well versed also, if you could talk a little bit on the involvement of what you feel, one, on the property side, but also the involvement of the collaborative work that you've seen in different groups that you've been involved with it and how that's played out. But now this is another layer above and could take away a lot of good work that stakeholders, the Montana right way, have been trying to protect this resource. And it seems that that's been a big hit on this, is the group that's bringing this forward. The way I see it, it feels like they're not satisfied with what we're working together to try to make a Montana solution. So Chuck, if you want to talk on that a little bit too, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Sales. So I am the campaign manager for the No on I-191 committee. We've got a large and growing coalition put together around No on I-191. And really, it's kind of rare to see in Montana politics on one of these ballot initiatives to see groups that represent so many different interests in Montana: business, industry, conservation groups, agricultural groups, and you name it. We've all come together to oppose this initiative. And like Senator mentioned, that's because this group is kind of operating outside of the mainstream. They didn't collaborate with anybody on this initiative. They didn't consult with the stakeholders. They didn't bother to try to find out what those unintended consequences might be. And I think ultimately that's going to be what undoes the work that they put into this initiative. So the proponents are out collecting signatures right now to qualify for the November ballot. They began signature collection on April 5th. And they've got about 35 more days to collect the signatures they need. They need a little over 30,000 valid signatures total, spread across 34 legislative districts in order to qualify. So it's a fairly high bar that they need to meet. We have been spot checking with some counties to see how many signatures have turned in, and the answer is not many so far. But typically with these ballot initiatives, we see the vast majority of signatures come in right at the end. So we do know that they're out there working, collecting signatures, and our job with this coalition is to get the word out on why people should decline to sign. We really want to try to beat this before June 17th, before their deadline to qualify for the ballot. And then we won't have to worry about it into the summer and fall and to beat it at the ballot box. And so that's why these arguments that you're hearing tonight are so important. We need to spread that message. So we're working through earned media and social media and working through our coalition partners to have them communicate with their members on all these very strong arguments we have about why I-191 isn't a good deal for this area. So we've got lots of ways to get involved. A lot of that information's on our website, stopi191.com. If you want to do earned media, do a letter to the editor or an opinion piece for your local paper, we can help you draft that. You can connect with us on social media and help spread the message that way. And I would just add, we've heard a lot of really good arguments tonight. I'll just add a couple that we found in our polling. Were very convincing. And one of those is the fact that this initiative would subject these rivers to regulations that are normally only found in national parks and wilderness areas. And so I think that just speaks to the extreme nature of this initiative. The second one that is a strong message for us is the fact that we already have some fairly strong water quality laws in the state. And this initiative is circumventing those laws and the process we have in place that works in a collaborative manner to make sure that stakeholders are represented in the process. This initiative goes around all of that and undoes what we've all worked together to accomplish. So all this messaging is on our website. You can refer to that. We've got some talking points that we can send out to you as well. And again, if you want to touch base with us, the best way to do it is send an email to info@stopi191.com, or if you want to connect through your association group, they know where to find me as well, and we can plug you into the campaign.
Thank you, Chuck. We'll I think now probably transition into, we're starting to get a few questions in. I will maybe reach out just to Amy. I do see in the chat, wanting to know about the temporary language on existing ORW areas, right? So I can imagine maybe up in the park, Yellowstone, or even, the other side, right? Glacier. Do you think that this then adding, if it does pass, the temporary language would have an effect? And if so, how do you think that effect would be to those areas that are already designated?
Yes, because the temporary language would be added to the statutes that does apply to all existing ORWs. It certainly would have an impact to currently designated outstanding resource waters. What that would look like, temporary turbidity permits would not be allowed. Other temporary changes to water quality wouldn't be allowed. So some of those were mentioned already, but bridge work, anything that would cause a temporary change to a water quality standard would not be allowed on existing outstanding resource waters.
Okay, thank you, Amy. And then for the folks, the attendees and other panelists, I guess, from what you've heard, right, from a different aspect, Feel free to type them into the question and answer, and then we'll go through those as well as they show up. I've got one from Representative Jane Gillette, who has heard that from some of the folks out there that it'll be okay, right? It looks like the legislature could undo, and yeah, that legislator does a lot of stuff, right? But they could undo that damage. And do we feel that that's true? And then, of course, is there a way? And Chuck, maybe we can. I think they've got a way to connect with us now. You've shared that, but we could possibly put that out there in the chat, how to get a hold of us. So who would like to venture a guess of if the legislature or legislature, future ones, could fix this?
Well, this is Representative White. I'll just take a little bit of a stab at that. We've had initiatives passed before that legislators have, or legislation has been passed to try to undo a vote of the people. And a lot of times that'll end up in litigation, however much that costs, but it seems to go to the courts, and the courts seem to side with the people's voice most of the time when you have a ballot initiative like this. So I'm not so sure that, I'm not so sure we can close that door once they open it and designate these two river stretches as ORWs. That's just my take.
Thank you, Representative. And I would agree, right, that it's going to be, if we do, for sure, it would be litigated. But I think that'd be a very hard stop. And then we have added the Stop 191 site. So Representative Gillette, I think you'll be able to contact them. That information's out there. So another one, would this limit the ability to add fishing? And maybe Representative White, you'd be able to answer this on future fishing accesses, right? And then also maintenance of those. And we see a lot of those areas, again, coming from locals that see the need to access and want to have that. Do you feel this would limit those abilities?
It for sure would stop anyone trying to build a new fishing access or boat ramp. It also, I think, in my mind, you have a lot of floaters with some floating companies. Anybody that's gone up the Gallatin in the springtime and going through where House Rock is at there, also floating and boat use outfitters, fishing guides over on the Madison. There are fishing accesses and boat launches. Could those be maintained if it was an ORW? It could open the door to litigation on trying to stop any kind of maintenance on those and bringing that river back to a natural state without fishing accesses, without boat ramps, without parking areas alongside of the river that could possibly have a stormwater discharge, any kind of sedimentation through maintenance or use of those boat ramps, could stop that fishing access from even being used. So I think it has a definite negative impact on everyone that wants to use that river, whether you're floating or whether you're fishing. It would be very detrimental, and it generates a lot of economic impact, positive impact to those communities in us and over in Big Sky, actually West Yellowstone, Gallatin Gateway, Bozeman. So I think there would be a huge economic impact, negative economic impact, if this ORW were to be, this initiative were to be passed.
Okay, thank you for that. And then David, I do see your hand is up, and maybe you want to add a little bit to that. It looks like just the turnouts. And I'm sure many of us have driven up to Big Sky and have seen what I would call an improvement to that stretch. But if you want to
Yes,
elaborate.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Sales. I mean, I moved to the Bozeman area in 1995, and I remember driving down through that canyon, and the number of turnouts and safety improvements that have been made to that road since then are impressive, but they're also a direct reflection of the increase of traffic and the increase. MDT doesn't improve an area because there's no problem. MDT fixes problems. And that's what they've been doing for 25 years along that road. And, we're going to continue to find areas where we need to have turnouts. And I mentioned that MDT is looking at a whole very elaborate improvement system just for 191, not to mention the road through Ennis. I'm not sure those things can be built under this initiative. Thank you.
As I've driven up there, traffic flow sometimes gets a little, well, my wife would say I have to have more patience. But with that, if an accident happened, right, and you weren't able to maintain, how do you feel that could come back, or would it be able to come back if maintenance and safety was maybe impaired by the abilities?
Yeah, well, let's think about what MDT's other job is, other than building and fixing things, is maintaining it. And we see those plows out there, and we want more plows out there. What do plows do? They remove everything that's on the roadway and push it to the side. Does this indeed prohibit snow plowing, or do we have to start putting ice melt down on the road instead of gravel? And we all know we don't want that. I think we're opening so many cans of worms here with this that we don't have good answers for it. But I mean, safety of plowing the roads is up there too.
Right. Thank you. And I'm going to shift a little bit to we've got Jim Hagenbarth wrote a question. So if somebody wants to respond to that, but again, the responsibility, right, to nature and society and enhancing the resource under our management. And definitely, as you read through his question and some of the encroachment and watershed, but also our fires that we're seeing. How do you think this may, for that matter, right? And I know that Representative White has been very involved in the watershed around the Bozeman's municipal watershed and trying to manage that for a lot of good reasons. But up in that canyon too, would anybody want to respond to Jim's question and just how that may lead again to the no action, right, and solving problems that this collaborative, what I think stakeholders have been working towards?
Senator Sales, I forgot to mention, I guess you had me on recreation, but I do want to address timber in that area. I sit on the Custer-Gallatin Working Group, which is a 9-county collaborative for the Custer-Gallatin National Forest, which for those folks that know the Custer-Gallatin, it goes from the Gallatin River to South Dakota. It's about 500 miles over there. But sitting on that collaborative, the Forest Service brought forward a project that's being proposed that's called the Gallatin East Project. And it's just in the scoping, the preliminary design. And that would be on the east side of the Gallatin River, somewhere in the area from Storm Castle to Portal Creek. That area up there has been logged, 40 years ago or so. If you go up there now, it's ready to be, actively managed and have some thinning done. What they're trying to do is try to prevent a catastrophic fire that could burn over that area. And then what you get in the springtime is just a huge amount of sedimentation that would go into that river. And I would think probably destroy the fishery of that river with the amount of sedimentation that could go in there if we had a catastrophic fire up in that area. When those mills and loggers go in there and do that, they have to go through the NEPA again and the MEPA. They have to do this, correctly, and make sure that it's environmentally sound in their practice in which they do that. But at the same time, just like road maintenance, you're going to need some sort of a temporary discharge for any kind of ground disturbance up there. I just am very fearful that we are not going to be able to do any fuel reduction. And this would be done through the Healthy Forest Initiative and Forest in Action, the state. We have a huge amount of our state that is at risk of catastrophic fire event. We breathe smoke every summer. I'm just afraid if they designate both the Madison and the Gallatin, that we're not going to be able to do any fuel reduction projects. And that's going to affect the mills, the mill workers, the loggers, lumber prices, building affordable homes. I mean, I could go on and on what you do with timber out there and the products that you make from timber. But you could shut down this whole timber industry and any kind of fuel reduction projects in both those drainages with this designation. I just wanted to mention that, Senator.
No, I thank you. And I think that fits well with both Jim's and Susan's, as we see, right, question on that. And then, Carrie, you brought up also, right, the housing side. And perhaps we've talked and heard a little bit about the affordable housing, and maybe David or Amy, both could talk a little bit about the effects of individual septic versus, right, community septic and the values of those. And are we going to be forcing, again, those unintended consequences of trying to do a better management of that resource? And could it actually do the opposite? And then, David, I'm sure you too, right, with the contractors would have some input on what that would look like with, you don't have to go far and you hear the effects of our housing. I mean, it's astounding when folks with what I would call, right, I'm a simple ag guy, but with a good paying job that just cannot afford to be here. And I know Representative White and I are sort of fortunate that our ancestors, right, set us up to where we've got a place to live. But I truly am worried about my next generations on the place and trying to keep them here. So David, Amy, could you talk a little bit about the septic and then the affordable or attainable housing side of the effects?
I'll let Amy start with the septic side of things.
I want to be careful about doing too much speculation, but with a municipal system, any kind of a new or increased discharge, we know that would be not allowed in the area. So then we could very possibly be looking at more of the individual on-site wastewater treatment systems. Now, with that, there would be a non-degradation review, and I did mention that non-degradation is a piece of our of the Water Quality Act, and because that's required with new on-site wastewater treatment systems, there is a chance that if there were going to be any impact to a waterway, because an on-site wastewater treatment system was going to be close enough to the waterway and it might have an impact that would not be allowed. So yeah, I think that there could be unintended consequences, but I would hesitate to say how far that would go without knowing what we're looking at specifically.
Right. No, and I appreciate that. And I don't want to put you in a box, so to speak. So you handled that very well. But right, it's those unknowns, right? And Bob, maybe you could talk a little bit about living in the world, right, of agriculture and those unknowns. I mean, we wake up every day, it seems, with the weather, the prices of our commodities. I mean, we do have a lot of unknowns. And Bob, do you think in ag, this would add to another layer of just adverse abilities and desires to keep that industry going? You finally get to a straw on the camel's back, so to speak, that you just, I don't want to say it's not fun anymore, but it sure takes the fun out of it, which makes it harder for our next kids to step up. You got anything on that side, Bob, in agriculture?
Well, you know, unfortunately, on the agriculture side, it seems like we've got a battle on about every front, from water rights to, you know, grazing permits to drought, you name it. You know, we're pretty adverse to, I guess, dealing with all the different things that come at us. But I mean, this affects the tributaries all the way up to the ranches, away from the rivers, and so it affects everybody up and down all those tributaries. It's grazing, it affects watering, irrigation. You know, it's a major thing, and I honestly think in the Madison Valley there's been so much conservation efforts that I think it's somewhat needless. And I think that there's, you know, we're not going to stop growth, but that's what this is trying to do. And it just hamstrings all of the good things that we've been trying to do, you know, all the different conservation efforts that have been done on the ground. And you know, I believe that, you know, at least in our valley here, we are the open spaces, and we are the, you know, the protectors of the resource and the wildlife here. You know, utilize all these private lands, and the more and more you put pressure on us, it just gets tougher and tougher to be here. And it's really easy to sell out. You know, that's the thing about ranching is you don't make that much money until you sell the property. And, you know, right now with all the housing and things like that, this, you know, just adds insult to, you know, I hate to see the land go that way myself, but, you know, the more pressure you put on agriculture, the more it can go that way and be more houses and more development. And so I guess I'd rather see as many ranches on the ground as we could keep.
Right. Thank you for that. And then on the other side of that, and right, I think this group completely understands when the contractors do and what they need to build. But this is that double whammy. David, do you have anything on that side of it? How you see it might impact, right, the ability to build?
Well, let me start with the fact that when the CARES Act and ARPA money came through, the state of Montana all of a sudden had this windfall of cash, and the legislature, and I think there was the federal guidelines that were on it, had to do with water and sewer projects. So there was about a $450 million handcuff on water and sewer projects with this money. So we didn't even have a handle on how much water and sewer projects were needed. And so they went out there, and it was almost $1 billion. And it was everything. It wasn't just $25 million that was needed in Big Sky to fix, to deal with the peak demands there. It was Joliet, it was Jordan, it was Roundup, it was Rapple-J. And so all of these mandates have come down from the federal levels. And so that's what we're living with now. Think about how bad this will be going forward. And so those are costs, whether it's Rapple-J or Big Sky, that are passed on to the people who have to connect to the system, the people who have to drop a well and get water for the system. The cost is passed on.
Okay. Thank you, David. And I'm going to ask Carrie from the Conservation District, Carl, to touch a little bit on, right, I'm here in the Gallatin, I know we've got a lot of erosion that happens, right, that we work and work with the conservation districts to try to protect that, not only right as a landowner, but definitely on the resource too. So how do you feel this could affect that work that again, I believe protects not the property right only, but the resource.
Oh, I think it would have a huge negative impact on the resource, because if you can't go in there and do the maintenance and do the restoration and do those type of things, it's just gonna exacerbate the potential for erosion. For instance, like on the East Gallatin, on a good flood event, no, the West Gallatin, after the last flood, that thing can change channels over, I think in the mid 80s or 90s, it changed over a quarter mile. It moved over a quarter of a mile. And so if you can't do things where you can go back in and put some maintenance efforts into that, it's just going to compound the problem. So, but up in this area, kind of add on to what Mr. Hagenbarth mentioned there, that if we get into this no management idea, we're past that stage in life in this state, on this earth. Everything has to be managed. You have to have the ability to manage it, and landowners they're the best conservationists out there, and they're the ones willing to go out there and put that extra step, extra mile in there. And there's a number of groups that work with landowners that help them to achieve that project and get that mitigation or maintenance or project on the ground. And if that ability is taken away, yeah, we're going to see the unraveling of it. We see it in other aspects of natural resources. For instance, we see some of these groups buy land and take the cows off, and we're just going to leave it be. Over time, that just the grass becomes old and decadent, and the new growth can't occur. So because there's no management aspect to it. So the same thing would occur on these river systems. So definitely, it would have a negative impact.
Right. Thank you, Carl. And then, sort of in the future, and in Jim's look too, in his first question, Mr. Hagenbarth, and maybe Krista, if I know that Aggie has been for quite some time now looking at the future, right, of water storage and the availability to manage, since we are a headwater state and area, and I think you could talk a little bit about, storage not meaning maybe bricks and mortar and cement, but different ways to manage those high spring flows and getting it to slow down. And a lot of what we're hearing is what we're, some perceive as the mismanagement of that land. Do you feel that this would allow some of the work that you've been doing and trying to do and work with the collaborative group to move towards that direction? How do you see this fitting?
Thank you, Senator Sales. Aggie, which is the Gallatin Association of Irrigators, has been working diligently with the state and others through the drought management planning process, recognizing the needs to identify innovative storage solutions. And when we talk storage, it doesn't necessarily mean a Canyon Ferry level storage dam that's on a source, but looking at alternative solutions to keep our water in our basins longer, have it come out more slowly. One of the challenges associated with the initiative that Aggie has identified is the opportunity to do different types of storage mechanisms, especially on tributaries or on land adjacent to tributaries. So we are concerned about I-191 and the impacts to our ability to manage our resources in a thoughtful and conscientious way.
Okay, I think, folks, we've gotten a pretty good wide array from various stakeholders to show, right, that this is going to impact what we've worked, and we meaning all of us, on different aspects of that resource as needed. And so I think the key takeaway in reading Representative Walsh's, sort of leaving comments, but truly we do need to get the word out, and hopefully Chuck shared that, and you guys are going to know how to connect, and you're going to see, I believe, from the group, the ability to put up yard signs, campaign signs, getting the word out inside, placards or even the little hand cards to leave it at businesses. But it's an easy sell to folks when they just present it in the short aspect of clean water, protecting the Gallatin. We all want that. I haven't heard a single one of you mention, right, that that's your intent, is to degrade and take away from. So I think that's got to be the voice. And we've joined together with a wide array of stakeholders and a lot of different interest groups. The WIPIC committee heard this and had a 8 or 6-2. I think it was 6-2, might have been 8-2. Doesn't matter, I guess, but bipartisan vote to not support. And the Attorney General has some pretty good comments. But please remember, that's only on the signature petition push. So if they get the signatures, the ballot measure would not have that information. So I appreciate your time, the panelists. Thank you very much for being willing. Please reach out to Chuck and the group to get the word out, because this is definitely right, as we brought up. It's one of those quick fires that if you get on it quick, we're going to be able to, I think, avert from it and keep working together. So with that, I appreciate it all. I really appreciate you folks taking time out. I hope you're enjoying a wet spring and a continued wet spring. So I believe, I don't know how we're going to sign off, but somehow the button will go and you'll all disappear. But thank you so much. Reappear. Let's get this done, and reach out if you need to Chuck's group. So, all right. Good night, all.
Thank you, everyone.